The night had all the makings of Hollywood magic. The TV Hall of Fame ceremony was not just another red carpet event. It was the gathering of legends, the celebration of decades of artistry, and the reminder of why television holds such power in shaping culture. Spotlights swept the evening sky, limousines rolled up in seamless rhythm, and cameras clicked in an almost musical symphony. Every guest who walked the carpet that night had earned their place in the spotlight through years of sweat, talent, and resilience. But there was one figure whose sudden arrival that evening threw the event into disarray, hijacking the stage and creating a storm of whispers that rippled far beyond the auditorium. That figure was Meghan Markle, and her uninvited presence would lead to a clash that no one had anticipated, a moment that ended with Viola Davis, one of Hollywood's most respected voices, delivering words that cut sharper than any scripted dialogue. At first, the atmosphere inside the auditorium was electric, the type of air that only an occasion drenched in history and recognition can carry. Viola Davis herself, dressed in a gown that radiated elegance and quiet authority, was among the honored guests of the night. She wasn't just another star sitting in the audience. She was an embodiment of the struggles and triumphs of countless actors who had clawed their way into the industry against impossible odds. Viola's story had always resonated because it was real. She represented not just success, but resilience, the power of authenticity, and the importance of truth. The irony, then, of what was about to unfold could not have been more striking. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Meghan's entrance was subtle at first, though nothing about her presence remained subtle for long. She arrived not through the red carpet procession like the invited guests, but through a side entrance, as though staging her own carefully planned reveal. Draped in an outfit that screamed of deliberate glamour, Meghan walked with a smile that seemed practiced, yet it couldn't disguise the undercurrent of tension in the room. Conversations paused, heads turned, and within moments, a hush fell as people began to ask each other, why was she here? Her name was not on the official guest list. No one had seen her announced as part of the night's honorees. This was not her stage, and yet, there she was. For many, this wasn't just about a surprise appearance. It was about history. Meghan Markle was a woman who had already divided public opinion across the world. From her royal exit with Prince Harry to her embattled attempts to carve out a Hollywood career, she was no stranger to controversy. Critics saw her as opportunistic, a woman who inserted herself into spaces she hadn't earned. Supporters claimed she was misunderstood, a victim of relentless scrutiny and double standards. But on this particular night, in this particular space, where decades of artistry and sacrifice were being celebrated, her sudden appearance felt to many like the final straw. The camera flashes turned toward Meghan as she moved into the auditorium. Some whispered that she was trying to recapture a sense of belonging to an industry that had not fully embraced her. Others speculated that she wanted to attach her name to an event already rich in prestige, hoping the association would polish her tarnished reputation. Regardless of intent, the move struck a nerve with those in attendance. For many artists in that room, their journey to the Hall of Fame stage had been paved with rejection, endless auditions, and years of thankless work. Meghan's presence, by contrast, seemed to them like an attempt to skip the line, to claim proximity to greatness without paying the dues that others had sacrificed so much for. Viola Davis had been watching from her seat. Known for her piercing eyes that could silence an audience even before she spoke, Viola embodied the weight of authenticity in that room. When she eventually rose to speak, it wasn't just another acceptance moment. It was a confrontation, a moment of reckoning. She paused on stage, microphone in hand, her voice steady but filled with unmistakable authority. With the audience hanging on her every word, she turned her attention toward Meghan. What she said wasn't long, nor was it flowery, but it carried the weight of decades of struggle, artistry, and respect for the craft. In front of the cameras, she told Meghan directly that this was not her moment, not her stage, and that she needed to leave. It was the kind of unscripted eruption that happens once in a generation, the kind of clash that slices through the noise of celebrity culture and forces everyone to pick a side. The room gasped. Some clapped in support of Viola's blunt honesty, while others sat frozen, unsure of what would happen next. Meghan, visibly shaken, tried to muster composure, but the sting of public humiliation was written across her face. The cameras, always hungry for drama, zoomed in mercilessly, capturing every flicker of emotion. This wasn't just a confrontation between two women. It was the embodiment of a larger cultural debate. Authenticity versus opportunism, earned respect versus borrowed spotlight, art versus spectacle. The beginning of this story lies not only in the clash itself, but in everything it symbolized. Meghan's appearance raised questions that had been simmering for years. Was she chasing relevance at all costs? Had she misjudged the industry that had once given her a modest platform as an actress? And perhaps more importantly, why did Viola Davis, a woman known for her grace and measured words, feel compelled to draw such a hard boundary in front of millions of viewers? These questions transformed what might have been a fleeting tabloid moment into a defining cultural flashpoint. As the tension built, the media wasted no time. Within hours, clips of the incident began circulating across social platforms. Headlines screamed of Viola Davis's public humiliation of Meghan Markle. Comment sections lit up with fiery debates, some praising Viola as a protector of artistic integrity, others accusing her of unnecessary cruelty. But beneath the frenzy lay a deeper story, one that went beyond viral moments and trending hashtags. It was about what happens when celebrity ambition collides with spaces meant to honor legacy, about the lines between performance and authenticity, and about the unspoken codes that govern Hollywood's most sacred stages. The introduction to this story is not simply a recounting of who said what. It is the setup of a narrative that reflects the fault lines of fame itself. At its core, it asks us to consider how much of our fascination with figures like Meghan Markle stems from admiration, and how much of it stems from the spectacle of watching them stumble. It forces us to reflect on why voices like Viola Davis's carry so much moral weight, and why the public clings to her words as though they were not just a call-out, but a cultural verdict. This was not merely a clash of personalities, it was a clash of values. The night ended with Meghan slipping out of the venue, her departure as scrutinized as her entrance. Viola, meanwhile, returned to her seat, the echo of her words still hanging in the air. The cameras caught her expression, steady, unflinching, resolute. For the audience inside and the millions watching later, the moment would not be forgotten. It was the beginning of a story that would dominate headlines, spark endless analysis, and expose the raw edges of fame in a way no script ever could. The night of the TV Hall of Fame had been designed with precision. Months of planning went into crafting the perfect event where television's greatest achievements and the people who made them possible would be celebrated in front of millions. The audience inside the auditorium wasn't just any crowd. It was filled with the kind of legends whose work had shaped cultural history. Actors, producers, writers, and innovators who had poured years of their lives into bringing stories to the screen. The carpet outside shimmered with flashes from cameras, reporters eager to capture soundbites, and fans hoping for a glimpse of their favorites. There was reverence in the air, an unspoken acknowledgement that this was not just another Hollywood gala. This was sacred ground for the entertainment world, a night that stood apart from the noise of celebrity gossip and fleeting fame. The grandeur was overwhelming, from the chandelier-lit lobby to the intricate stage setup that evoked nostalgia for television across the decades. Screens displayed clips from shows that had changed the industry, bringing laughter and tears to generations. Each chair bore the weight of someone who had carved their place into this history, someone who had fought through endless auditions, rejection, and the slow grind toward recognition. For the people inside, this event was not about glamour alone. It was about legacy. Which is why, when Meghan Markle stepped into the room, unannounced and uninvited, the sanctity of the night shifted instantly. She walked with confidence, the kind of confidence that came not from belonging, but from wanting to project control. Her gown glittered beneath the lights, tailored to perfection, and her smile carried the energy of someone who believed her arrival would enhance the event. Yet, the reaction from those around her was anything but welcoming. Whispers spread like wildfire. Guests exchanged glances of confusion, some even annoyance. The murmurs were less about curiosity and more about disbelief. She wasn't on the list. Her name hadn't been announced. Her seat, if she had one, wasn't prepared. And yet, she was there, moving as though she belonged to the very fabric of the evening. The question was unavoidable. What had compelled Meghan Markle to walk into one of the most exclusive events in television history without an invitation? Some whispered that she was trying to rebrand herself, to attach her image to an institution that still held unshakable prestige. Others speculated she was attempting to force relevance, inserting herself into spaces that didn't ask for her presence. Whatever the reason, her entrance disrupted the harmony of the night. The glances she received weren't those of admiration. They were of suspicion, and in some cases, irritation. For context, the Hall of Fame event wasn't like a film premiere or a glitzy awards ceremony where red carpet drama often overshadowed the awards themselves. This was a night with its own gravity, honoring years of service, talent, and consistency in a brutal industry. You didn't simply show up here, you were called to it. That is why the disruption carried weight. Every person in that auditorium had clawed their way into their seats with decades of sacrifice. Meghan's uninvited entrance, to them, was a violation of an unspoken covenant, a trampling on the dignity of an occasion built on respect and endurance. Viola Davis, seated near the front, had been watching quietly. Viola was no stranger to difficult spaces. She had risen from poverty, from being overlooked and typecast, to standing among the greatest actors of her generation. Her presence that evening wasn't about spectacle. It was about recognition of a lifetime's worth of artistry. Viola represented authenticity. She had endured rejection, prejudice, and systemic barriers, and yet she carved out a career that inspired millions. To her, the Hall of Fame wasn't a red carpet stunt. It was sacred, which is why Meghan's casual insertion into the evening felt to her, and to many others, like a mockery. The tension in the room was not spoken, but it was thick enough to touch. Meghan smiled as though she didn't notice, greeting people with polite nods, but the energy did not flow toward her. There were no outstretched arms pulling her in, no voices celebrating her arrival. Instead, there was discomfort, the kind of discomfort that builds when boundaries are crossed and no one knows who will call it out first. That moment came when Viola Davis stood, not with anger, but with conviction. Her words didn't just cut through the silence. They pierced the heart of the event. Addressing Meghan directly, she told her that this was not her stage, not her moment, and that she needed to leave. Gasps echoed through the auditorium. Some applauded Viola's blunt honesty. Others froze in disbelief at the sheer audacity of someone voicing what the room had been thinking. Meghan froze, caught between defiance and embarrassment, her practiced composure cracking beneath the weight of Viola's words. The cameras, merciless as always, captured every flicker of her reaction. In that moment, the power dynamic of the night shifted completely. The Hall of Fame belonged to Viola and those honored, not to Meghan and her search for attention. But why was this so significant? Why did this moment of confrontation matter more than just a spat between two women? The answer lies in what the Hall of Fame represented. This was not just a night of glitz. It was a reminder that television, at its best, is built on commitment, consistency, and authenticity. Viola Davis embodied all of those things. Meghan Markle, in the eyes of many, embodied the opposite: opportunism, performance without grounding, ambition without roots. When those two forces collided in front of the cameras, it was more than just an awkward exchange. It became a symbol of a larger cultural divide. In the days that followed, media outlets would replay that moment endlessly. Commentators would dissect it, fans would meme it, and critics would frame it as yet another example of Meghan's miscalculation. But inside that auditorium, as it happened live, it wasn't about headlines or trending hashtags. It was about respect. It was about the dignity of those who had built their place in that hall, and the audacity of someone who tried to slip into it uninvited. Viola's words, raw and unfiltered, resonated because they expressed what so many were already feeling. Enough was enough. Viola Davis's name had already been etched into the legacy of television and cinema long before the night of the Hall of Fame ceremony. To understand why her reaction to Meghan Markle's unexpected arrival carried such weight, one has to understand who Viola Davis is and what she represents. She is not simply another Hollywood actress. She is a towering figure in the world of performance, a woman whose presence commands respect even in silence. Her journey from a childhood marked by poverty in Rhode Island to the pinnacle of artistic recognition has been one of relentless perseverance. She was not handed her career. She carved it out of stone with resilience and raw talent. By the time of this event, Viola had already won an Oscar, an Emmy, and a Tony, placing her in the elite group of performers known as EGOT winners. But her influence extended beyond awards. She had become a voice for truth, for integrity, for those who dared to speak openly about injustice and the struggles behind the glamour of Hollywood. On the night of the Hall of Fame, Viola was more than an honoree. She was a symbol of what the event was meant to celebrate. Dressed in an ensemble that balanced elegance with quiet power, she moved through the room not as someone seeking attention, but as someone whose very career demanded acknowledgement. Her speeches over the years had been laced with honesty that often left audiences stunned. She had spoken openly about the indignities she faced in the industry, about typecasting, about poverty, and about the barriers that actors of color endured. Viola Davis represented authenticity in an industry too often accused of fabrication. That authenticity became the sharp edge of the night's unfolding drama. In contrast, Meghan Markle represented something entirely different in that moment. For years, her name had been surrounded by controversy, her every move dissected for signs of manipulation or desperation. Her transition from actress to Duchess of Sussex had catapulted her into a level of fame most Hollywood stars never reach. Yet her relationship with the public soured quickly. To many, she appeared as someone constantly fighting to control her narrative, often stumbling into accusations of staging her own image rather than letting her work speak for itself. In Hollywood terms, where authenticity is worshipped as the holy grail of artistry, Meghan was seen by some as the opposite: calculated, manufactured, seeking the spotlight without having earned the reverence that those honored that night had painstakingly achieved. Viola's reputation, therefore, made her uniquely positioned to confront the situation. No one could accuse Viola of jealousy or irrelevance. Her career was steady, her achievements undeniable. When she rose to speak, her words cut with the force of credibility. This wasn't a tabloid feud. It was a woman with decades of earned respect drawing a line in the sand against what she saw as an intrusion into a space meant for those who had sacrificed and endured. Viola was not protecting her own spotlight. She was protecting the sanctity of the evening and, by extension, the dignity of the industry itself. To grasp why her presence mattered so much, think of how audiences react when Viola Davis appears on screen. In How to Get Away with Murder, her role as Annalise Keating was not just a character, but a performance that demanded the audience's attention and respect. She could sit silently in a courtroom scene, and her eyes alone told more than pages of dialogue ever could. In films like Fences, she transformed pain and resilience into something almost spiritual. That ability to project truth is what makes her presence off-screen equally commanding. People expect Viola Davis to embody integrity, to uphold the values she so often voices. So, when she stood on that stage and directed her words at Meghan Markle, it wasn't just Viola the actress speaking. It was Viola the voice of authenticity in Hollywood. The contrast between the two women couldn't have been starker. One was there by right, her career and struggles woven into the very reason the Hall of Fame existed. The other was there by choice, uninvited, stepping into a space she hadn't been called to. This juxtaposition created a dramatic collision of symbolism. Viola, representing years of unglamorous grind, versus Meghan, representing the shortcut, the leapfrog attempt to seize relevance. When Viola told Meghan to leave, it was more than a rejection of her presence. It was a rejection of everything she was perceived to stand for. Opportunism, performance without authenticity, and intrusion without invitation. The audience understood this even before the media framed it. Inside the hall, there was a collective recognition of why Viola's words mattered. Here was a woman who had given her life to the craft, who had earned every accolade with blood, sweat, and unrelenting truth, defending the sanctity of the very stage they stood on. Those who applauded were not simply cheering for Viola's sharpness. They were affirming their own respect for the legacy of the industry. Those who remained silent were not necessarily against her words, but but stunned by the brazenness of a moment that would never have been scripted or expected. It is also important to consider Viola's history with speaking up when others stay quiet. She has long been outspoken about issues of race, representation, and fairness. In Hollywood, where silence often preserves careers, Viola has consistently chosen to use her platform for uncomfortable truths. Her speeches have often transcended the moment, leaving audiences with phrases and declarations that are quoted for years after. That night was no different. What she said was brief, but it was sharp, and it aligned perfectly with her reputation. She did not embellish. She did not soften the blow. She told Meghan to leave, because the night was not hers, and that directness made the moment unforgettable. For Meghan, standing on the receiving end of that confrontation was devastating precisely because of who delivered it. If it had been a lesser figure, she might have dismissed it as jealousy or irrelevance. But Viola Davis was untouchable. To be called out by her was to be called out by the conscience of the industry itself. Meghan's smile faltered, her body stiffened, and the cameras caught it all. There was no graceful way out, no spin that could disguise what had happened in front of a live audience. The weight of Viola's authority crushed whatever image Meghan had hoped to project that night. Meghan Markle's decision to walk into the TV Hall of Fame ceremony uninvited was not the kind of spontaneous act it may have appeared to be. To many in the audience, the sight of her gliding across the venue floor in a designer gown was an immediate reminder of her ability to insert herself into conversations, spaces, and narratives that did not belong to her. Chapter 3 is about the breaking point, the precise moment her entrance transformed from surprise to scandal, from curiosity to outrage. What happened that night was not just an awkward misstep, but a clash between entitlement and tradition, a moment that laid bare the reasons Meghan continues to polarize the public and Hollywood alike. The Hall of Fame ceremony had a rhythm. Each guest walked in, greeted peers, and settled into their seats. The air was filled with the energy of celebration and the anticipation of speeches that would honor decades of work. Then Meghan appeared. Unlike the invited honorees and guests, her arrival was neither announced nor applauded. There were no reporters calling her name on the red carpet earlier, no buzz about her being included in the prestigious lineup. Her presence materialized like a ripple across calm waters, sending murmurs throughout the crowd. Those seated near the entrance exchanged glances, unsure whether to stand, acknowledge her, or ignore her completely. Meghan smiled and nodded toward familiar faces, but the reception was icy, the kind of polite acknowledgement one gives when manners override true feeling. Observers noted every detail of her entrance. Her gown shimmered beneath the lights, as though it had been carefully chosen to capture attention. Her walk was measured, deliberate, every step exuding the calculated poise of someone aware that eyes were on her. But instead of admiration, there was discomfort. Meghan's demeanor seemed rehearsed, as though she had envisioned herself as part of the night, weaving her narrative into one of Hollywood's most respected traditions. But to those watching, it came across as presumptuous, a performance in search of an audience. The clash between her intention and the reality around her created an awkward tension that grew with every second. There is an unspoken etiquette at events like the Hall of Fame. To be part of it is to be chosen, to be validated by years of work and by the collective respect of the industry. It is not a space where one simply arrives and demands recognition. Meghan's entrance broke that rule, and in doing so, she unsettled not only the people in attendance, but the symbolic meaning of the night itself. For many artists, their invitation was the culmination of a life's work. Meghan, by contrast, appeared to be trying to claim space without having been asked. It wasn't just about her walking into a room. It was about what her walking in said, that she believed she belonged, even when those who curated the event had not given her that place. What made her presence particularly provocative was the contrast between her history in Hollywood and the careers of those being honored. Meghan's acting career, while real, had never placed her among the titans of television. She was known primarily for her supporting role in Suits, a show that had enjoyed success but not the kind of cultural impact that earned Hall of Fame distinction. Her fame did not come from television achievements, but from her marriage to Prince Harry, a move that catapulted her into global celebrity. To walk into the Hall of Fame event as though her Hollywood career had paved the way for her presence was seen by many as an affront to the blood, sweat, and rejection faced by those who truly earned their seats. This is where the breaking point lies. For some, Meghan's move might have been excused as ignorance, a misunderstanding of how sacred the evening was to those in attendance. But for others, it was calculated. It was the latest in a series of moves where Meghan appeared to use proximity to established institutions as a way to boost her own image. Just as critics accused her of leveraging her royal marriage to reinvent herself in Hollywood, here she seemed to be leveraging the prestige of the Hall of Fame to attach her brand to something bigger than herself. That sense of opportunism is what pushed the room to the edge, preparing it for the eruption that would follow when Viola Davis took the microphone. The audience's discomfort grew with every passing minute Meghan lingered. Some honorees quietly shook their heads, others whispered under their breath. The event organizers exchanged nervous looks, unsure how to address the situation without creating a scene. Meghan, meanwhile, carried on as though she belonged, chatting briefly with those who responded out of courtesy but never warmth. It was as if two realities were unfolding simultaneously. The one Meghan wanted to project, in which she was a natural part of the evening, and the one everyone else experienced, in which she was an intruder disrupting a sacred space. For those who had endured decades of rejection before tasting success, Meghan's presence felt like salt in a wound. Hollywood is built on resilience. Actors work day jobs while chasing auditions, endure countless no's, and often wait years before a single breakthrough. The Hall of Fame was designed to honor that grind, that perseverance. Meghan's sudden appearance bypassed all of it, as though she could step onto the stage of recognition without first walking the road of sacrifice. That was the heart of the breaking point. It wasn't personal resentment against Meghan as an individual. It was outrage at what her presence represented, the idea that celebrity alone could substitute for hard-earned legacy. It is telling that the breaking point came not during Meghan's entrance, but in the silence that followed. The murmurs grew, but no one spoke openly at first. This restraint reflected the respect people had for the event itself. They did not want to tarnish the night with confrontation. But the unease was palpable. By the time Viola Davis rose to address the room, the energy had reached a peak where words were inevitable. Meghan's presence had created a fracture in the evening, and someone had to mend it by restoring the sanctity of the occasion. Viola's words would serve as that restoration, but the breaking point was already sealed in the moment Meghan crossed the threshold into the Hall of Fame without invitation. In the broader narrative of Meghan Markle's life, this moment was significant because it epitomized a pattern. Her critics saw it as another instance of her disregarding boundaries, of forcing herself into spaces where she had not been welcomed, of trying to manufacture a spotlight that no longer sought her naturally. Her supporters, on the other hand, argued that she was unfairly judged no matter what she did, that her very presence was enough to provoke criticism. Yet, even among those sympathetic to her, the Hall of Fame incident was hard to defend. The symbolism was too stark, the contrast between her career and the legacy of those honored too glaring. It wasn't just another tabloid headline. It was a cultural misstep with consequences that resonated far beyond the room. The air inside the auditorium shifted when Viola Davis finally spoke. Up until that moment, Meghan's uninvited presence had been an elephant in the room that everyone tried to ignore, a tension hidden beneath polite smiles and forced composure. But there comes a point in any story when the silence must break, and on this night, that responsibility fell upon the one woman whose voice carried more weight than anyone else's. Viola stood, the microphone in her hand, and the atmosphere changed instantly. Cameras swiveled, conversations died mid-sentence, and a hush swept over the crowd. Everyone in attendance knew they were about to witness something that would become etched in the memory of Hollywood history. Viola's posture alone commanded attention. She didn't raise her voice or deliver a theatrical performance. She didn't need to. Her mere presence demanded respect, and her silence before speaking was louder than the chatter of the audience. Her eyes locked onto Meghan, and for a moment the world seemed to freeze. Meghan, who had been trying to maintain her composure, stiffened slightly. That practiced smile faltered under the weight of Viola's gaze. It was the look of someone who had endured the industry's hardships, who had paid the price of authenticity, and who now stood as the custodian of a sacred space. When Viola finally spoke, her words struck like a thunderclap. "This is not your stage," she said, her voice firm but controlled, ringing with clarity that cut through the tension. "This night is not yours. Leave the show now." The words were simple, but their power came from who spoke them. Viola Davis, an actress synonymous with truth and dignity, was not simply scolding Meghan. She was speaking on behalf of every artist in that hall, on behalf of the very essence of the event. The Hall of Fame was not a playground for opportunism, and Viola's declaration was the line in the sand. The audience reacted in waves. Gasps of shock, murmurs of approval, some scattered applause, and stunned silence from those too shocked to respond. In a room filled with legends, one legend had just defended the sanctity of their shared moment. Meghan's reaction was caught on every camera angle. She froze, her smile turning brittle, her eyes betraying a flicker of shock. She had not expected confrontation, certainly not in such a public and brutal fashion. Her hands twitched as though she didn't know whether to stay seated, to argue, or to leave quietly. For a woman who had built her public persona on control and careful staging, the moment stripped away any illusion of composure. Every second she lingered felt like an eternity under the watchful eyes of the audience and the cameras. The humiliation was palpable, hanging in the air like thick smoke. What made this jab so unforgettable was not just the words themselves, but the context behind them. Viola's statement was not a personal attack. It wasn't about jealousy, rivalry, or malice. It was about respect. The Hall of Fame was a space built for honoring careers that had shaped culture. It was about perseverance, sacrifice, and art. By showing up uninvited, Meghan had broken that unspoken code, and Viola's words restored the balance. In that moment, she became the voice of the room, the one who articulated what everyone else had been thinking but hadn't dared to say out loud. The fallout was instantaneous. The audience erupted into whispers and commentary, phones buzzing as clips were already being uploaded online. Social media, though not yet aware of the full exchange, would soon explode with hashtags and debates. But inside the hall, the silence after Viola's words was deafening. Meghan, still seated, seemed to shrink slightly under the intensity of the gaze around her. There was no rescue from the organizers, no smoothing over from fellow celebrities. She was isolated, a single figure under the weight of judgment, as the entire room seemed to wait for her next move. Viola's sharpness resonated because it tapped into something deeper than the event itself. It became a reflection of the broader cultural conversation about Meghan Markle. For years, she had been accused of staging her image, of forcing her presence into spaces where she wasn't fully welcomed. This incident crystallized that perception. Viola's words carried the authority of someone who had clawed her way into recognition the hard way, contrasting sharply with the perception of Meghan as someone who used status and connections as shortcuts. The confrontation turned into a symbolic trial, with the audience as jury and Viola as the voice of the verdict. In moments like these, silence can be as revealing as words. Meghan's inability to respond spoke volumes. Had she attempted to argue, she might have seemed defiant, but also disrespectful to the integrity of the night. Had she left immediately, she would have conceded defeat too quickly. Instead, she lingered, trying to collect herself, but the damage had already been done. Every second of hesitation was captured on film, immortalized in the public memory. Meghan, usually the architect of her own narrative, had lost control of the story. And in Hollywood, where perception is everything, losing control is the ultimate humiliation. For Viola, the confrontation was over as soon as she spoke. She didn't linger on the words or turn the moment into a spectacle. She returned to the business of the evening, as though she had done nothing more than speak the truth. That calm dismissal was perhaps the cruelest blow of all. Viola didn't need to shout or grandstand. She had spoken, and the authority of her words was final. The audience understood it, Meghan understood it, and soon the world would understand it too. What made this verbal jab so significant was its raw simplicity. Hollywood thrives on spectacle, on carefully crafted drama. But this wasn't scripted. This wasn't polished. It was real, unscripted, and unfiltered. The kind of moment that pierces through the noise and lingers in the cultural consciousness long after the event is over. Viola's words would be replayed, quoted, and dissected endlessly, but their power lay in the fact that they were not planned. They were a spontaneous defense of authenticity, a refusal to let opportunism overshadow legacy. The humiliation for Meghan was not only public but symbolic. Being told to leave a show in front of an audience of peers and cameras was the ultimate rejection. It wasn't just about being uninvited. It was about being explicitly told that she did not belong. For someone whose entire public life had revolved around belonging, to the royal family, to Hollywood, to the global stage, the rejection cut to the core. It was a moment where all the criticism leveled at her over the years seemed to crystallize into a single, unforgettable scene. Hollywood is an industry built on unspoken rules. For those who live and breathe the craft, respect is the currency that carries more weight than fame. At the TV Hall of Fame ceremony, that truth came into sharper focus than ever before. While Viola Davis's confrontation with Meghan Markle was the spark that lit up headlines, the deeper story was about why her uninvited presence was perceived as such an offense. It was not simply a matter of being there without an invitation. It was a violation of Hollywood's unspoken code of respect, a set of boundaries and traditions that separate those who have earned their place from those who attempt to take shortcuts. The Hall of Fame, unlike other glitzy events, is not about spectacle. It isn't about fashion, who arrives with whom, or who manages to dominate the red carpet. It is about legacy. To be invited is to be recognized for years, often decades, of contribution to an art form that has shaped global culture. That recognition is not bought, it is not borrowed, and it is certainly not self-declared. It is given, reluctantly and rarely, by peers who understand the price that has been paid to reach such a point. When Meghan Markle stepped into that space, she wasn't merely attending a party. She was attempting to insert herself into a narrative she had not yet earned the right to enter. In Hollywood, invitations matter more than appearances. The industry operates on relationships, credibility, and proof of endurance. An invitation signals that you are not only recognized for your work, but respected for it. Respect is not about wealth or connections. It is about consistency, sacrifice, and authenticity. That is why Meghan's uninvited entrance stung so deeply. It broke the invisible barrier that artists hold sacred. To those who had spent their lives fighting for a chance, her appearance felt like a trespass, an act of entitlement that disrespected their journey. For decades, artists in Hollywood have lived by this code. They speak of the grind, the endless auditions, the humiliations of rejection, the nights waiting tables, or working side jobs just to sustain their dreams. These are the untold stories behind the glittering surface. For every person honored at the Hall of Fame, there were years of struggle that the audience could only imagine. By contrast, Meghan's career in television had been modest. She had experienced rejection, yes, but her fame skyrocketed not because of her craft, but because of her marriage. That fact was not lost on the people in that hall. To them, her presence symbolized not perseverance, but privilege, not artistry, but opportunism. There is also an unspoken understanding in Hollywood that when one achieves recognition, it comes with humility. Even the biggest stars know that respect is fragile, and arrogance can destroy decades of hard work. Viola Davis herself often spoke about humility, about remembering where she came from and never forgetting the struggles of her early years. When she called Meghan out, it was not only because Meghan had intruded, but because her presence carried an air of entitlement that was the opposite of humility. Viola's words were not just a rebuke to Meghan personally. They were a reminder to the entire industry that humility is non-negotiable, even at the height of fame. Breaking the code of respect is not always about words or actions. Sometimes it is about timing and presence. Hollywood thrives on symbols, and the Hall of Fame was one of its most powerful symbols. Meghan walking in uninvited was seen as trying to hijack that symbol for her own narrative. She may not have said a word, but her very presence sent a message. I belong here. For those who had fought for years to truly belong, that message was intolerable. It turned a night meant to celebrate legacies into a night overshadowed by controversy. Another part of the unspoken code is about honoring those who came before. Every Hall of Fame inductee stands on the shoulders of generations of storytellers. To be part of that moment is to acknowledge the weight of history, to honor not only oneself, but those who paved the way. Meghan's entrance did the opposite. It drew attention away from the honorees, placing the spotlight on her. Instead of celebrating legacy, the room was forced to reckon with disruption. For Viola Davis and others, this was the ultimate disrespect. To steal attention from legends was not just bad manners, it was sacrilege. There is also a deeper layer to why Meghan's act was perceived so harshly. In Hollywood, self-promotion is expected, but there are boundaries. Publicists arrange appearances, actors attend premieres, and stars network to maintain visibility. But there is a line between strategic promotion and desperate intrusion. The line is often subtle, but everyone in the industry knows when it has been crossed. Meghan's arrival without invitation was seen as crossing that line. It wasn't clever branding. It wasn't savvy networking. It was desperation, and desperation in Hollywood is poison. Once someone is seen as desperate, their credibility begins to erode, no matter how carefully they craft their public image. For Viola Davis, the violation of the code was not abstract. It was personal. She had fought too hard and too long to see the sanctity of that evening compromised. Her rebuke was not premeditated but instinctive, born from decades of living by those rules herself. She had endured rejection, endured being overlooked, endured stereotypes that reduced her worth. And yet she earned her place. To see someone attempt to bypass that journey struck at the very heart of what she valued. Her words to Meghan were not just about one night. They were about the principles of an industry that had already taken so much from her and others like her. The unspoken code of respect is also enforced by the collective memory of Hollywood. Incidents like Meghan's intrusion are not easily forgotten. They become stories told backstage, whispered at dinner parties, remembered during award seasons. Hollywood never forgets disrespect, and the Hall of Fame incident will be remembered not as Meghan seeking to celebrate television, but as Meghan breaking the rules. Viola's sharp rebuke ensured that the memory would not fade but would instead become a cautionary tale for those who might attempt the same. What this moment revealed was how fragile reputation can be. Meghan's brand has long been one of reinvention, of trying to reclaim control over her story. But reinvention requires respect, and respect requires adherence to the code. By breaking it so visibly, she set herself back further than any PR campaign could repair. Viola Davis, by defending that code, elevated herself even higher in the eyes of her peers. Her words reminded everyone that no amount of fame or fortune can replace the currency of respect. The Hall of Fame confrontation did not emerge from nowhere. It was not an isolated misstep, nor was it merely an unfortunate misunderstanding of protocol. To truly grasp why Meghan Markle's uninvited appearance was met with such hostility, one has to look at the wider canvas of her public life, where carefully crafted PR stunts often appeared to take center stage over genuine connection or accomplishment. Chapter 6 dives into the history of Meghan's reputation for staging moments, for controlling narratives, and for trying to manufacture the spotlight rather than letting it come naturally. Her entrance that evening was seen as the culmination of a pattern that had been building for years, one that left little room for generosity from those who already viewed her with suspicion. From the beginning of her life as a public figure, Meghan understood the power of image. As an actress on Suits, she built her career on a show that gave her steady recognition but never elevated her to household name status. That changed when her relationship with Prince Harry became public. Suddenly, Meghan's face was on every magazine cover, her name spoken in every newsroom. With that fame came an opportunity, but it also came with scrutiny. From the very start, her critics accused her of using the relationship to catapult herself into global relevance. Her defenders argued that this was sexist, that women are always accused of opportunism in ways men are not. But the accusations stuck, and every move Meghan made thereafter was filtered through this lens. Was she acting out of authenticity or out of ambition? The Netflix and Spotify deals that followed her royal exit only deepened this divide. Meghan and Harry signed multi-million-dollar contracts to produce content that promised to inspire, to elevate unheard voices, to transform the cultural conversation. Yet years later, little tangible had emerged from those deals. The Spotify partnership ended in embarrassment, with the streaming giant cutting ties after delivering only one podcast series, which itself was criticized for shallow storytelling. The Netflix collaboration sputtered with projects announced and then canceled, leaving the impression of unfulfilled promises. For many in Hollywood, these failures reinforced the perception that Meghan was more interested in the appearance of being a media mogul than in doing the actual work required to earn that title. Public events became another point of contention. Time and again, Meghan was accused of staging appearances designed for maximum exposure. There were whispers about her allegedly alerting paparazzi to her whereabouts, ensuring that photographers captured her in carefully chosen outfits and poses. One infamous incident involved her supposedly private visit to a women's shelter that mysteriously ended up documented in glossy photos distributed to the press. To her critics, these moments were proof of a woman more interested in optics than impact. To her defenders, they were simply the realities of being a high-profile figure trying to balance visibility with intention. Still, the suspicion lingered. The Oprah Winfrey interview in 2021 was a turning point. Meghan and Harry sat down to share their truth about leaving the royal family, and while the interview was hailed by some as courageous, others viewed it as a carefully orchestrated performance. Every gesture, every pause, every revelation seemed designed to elicit maximum emotional reaction. Even Oprah's shocked expressions became memes, amplifying the sense that this was more spectacle than sincerity. The interview cemented Meghan's reputation as a figure who understood the mechanics of media, but also as someone who seemed to bend the truth to fit her narrative. Critics highlighted inconsistencies in her claims, pointing out discrepancies that suggested exaggeration or selective storytelling. Once again, the charge of PR stunt was leveled against her, and once again, her defenders insisted she was being unfairly maligned. By the time Meghan appeared at the Hall of Fame event, the public's patience had already worn thin. Her history of highly controlled, often opportunistic appearances meant that many in the industry viewed her uninvited arrival not as an innocent mistake, but as a deliberate attempt to hijack the moment. The optics were clear. Meghan stepping into a space reserved for the most respected figures in television, cameras turning to capture her, headlines waiting to be written about her presence. To those who saw her as addicted to attention, it was the perfect storm of validation for their beliefs. She wasn't there to celebrate legacy. She was there to create another scene, another headline, another round of publicity. This reputation for PR stunts wasn't built solely on major media deals or high-profile interviews. Even smaller incidents contributed to the narrative. Rumors swirled about Meghan arranging photographers to capture her walking dogs near her California home, about her insistence on carefully staged public appearances that projected family unity even as her relationship with the royal family fractured. There were claims that moments presented as organic, such as charity visits or everyday errands, were often choreographed for maximum effect. Each story, whether exaggerated or not, added another layer to the perception of Meghan as someone who treated her life as a constant performance. Hollywood insiders are particularly sensitive to this kind of behavior. For them, authenticity is not just a buzzword, it is a lifeline. Audiences can spot falseness in a heartbeat, and stars who lean too heavily on contrived narratives often burn out quickly. Meghan's perceived reliance on PR stunts placed her at odds with the values of an industry that, at its core, still celebrates those who seem real, no matter how polished their image may be. Viola Davis, by contrast, represented that authenticity. Her words that night at the Hall of Fame struck with such force because they contrasted so starkly with Meghan's reputation. Where Viola was grounded in truth, Meghan was seen as floating on the surface of performance. The Hall of Fame incident crystallized this divide. Meghan's uninvited entrance was interpreted as just another in a long string of staged moments, an attempt to control the narrative by attaching herself to an event steeped in credibility. But this time, the strategy backfired spectacularly. Instead of stealing the spotlight, she was called out publicly and humiliated in front of peers and cameras. Viola's words pierced through the facade, stripping away the layers of spin and reminding everyone that the industry does not tolerate opportunism on its most sacred stages. In many ways, Meghan's pattern of PR stunts had created the conditions for this humiliation. Had her history been different, Had she been seen as humble, genuine, and respectful, the Hall of Fame incident might have been forgiven as a misunderstanding. But years of suspicion, fueled by deals that fizzled and appearances that felt staged, meant that she walked into that room already carrying the weight of skepticism. Viola's confrontation didn't create that perception. It confirmed it. For those watching, it was the moment when the curtain finally fell and the performance was exposed for what it was. If Meghan Markle's uninvited entrance into the TV Hall of Fame ceremony represented the peak of calculated spectacle, Viola Davis's response represented the opposite: authenticity forged through years of truth-telling. Chapter 7 is the story of why Viola's voice carried such weight that night, why her rebuke to Meghan was met with gasps of recognition and applause rather than disapproval, and why her reputation as Hollywood's truth-teller made her the only person in that room who could have delivered such a public blow without fear of repercussion. For decades, Viola Davis has been more than just an actress. She has been a voice of moral clarity in an industry often riddled with facades and compromise. From the very beginning of her career, she distinguished herself not only through her performances, but through her refusal to conform to the lies that often cushion Hollywood egos. She came from nothing, a childhood steeped in poverty, hunger, and systemic neglect. She has spoken candidly about growing up in a rat-infested apartment, about being so poor she went to school smelling of urine because her family couldn't afford regular access to plumbing. These admissions were not calculated for pity. They were delivered in interviews, speeches, and memoirs with raw honesty. Her willingness to tell the truth, no matter how uncomfortable, became part of her identity. That truthfulness translated directly into her artistry. On screen, she never shied away from roles that exposed vulnerability, pain, or complexity. She became famous for scenes where tears streamed down her face without vanity, for moments when her characters revealed a kind of humanity that audiences rarely saw in an industry obsessed with gloss. In Fences, opposite Denzel Washington, she delivered one of the most searing monologues in modern film, crying not with pretty Hollywood tears, but with guttural, soul-deep pain. In How to Get Away with Murder, she ripped off her wig and makeup in front of the camera, exposing a black woman's reality with an intimacy that shattered illusions. Every performance screamed authenticity. Every gesture told audiences, this is the truth. It is this reputation that followed her into the Hall of Fame ceremony. Viola Davis was not a woman who performed off-screen. She spoke truth in every setting, whether accepting awards, giving interviews, or standing on prestigious stages. Her speeches at award shows often made headlines not because they were controversial, but because they pierced the heart of issues no one else dared to mention. She called out the lack of roles for women of color. She spoke about the indignities of being overlooked despite undeniable talent. She reminded the industry that art was not about pretense, but about exposing the human condition. When she spoke, people listened, because they knew her words came from lived experience rather than manufactured spin. So when Meghan Markle entered the Hall of Fame room uninvited, it was almost inevitable that Viola Davis would be the one to react. Others may have whispered behind closed doors or rolled their eyes discreetly. Others may have pretended not to notice, brushing off the discomfort to maintain the facade of Hollywood civility. But Viola was different. She was incapable of swallowing a truth that needed to be spoken, especially in a space meant to honor authenticity. Her rebuke that night was not a performance. It was a reflex, an instinctive defense of everything the ceremony represented. Hollywood insiders often describe Viola as a woman without fear. This does not mean she lacks vulnerability. Indeed, her vulnerability is part of her strength, but that she does not fear the consequences of speaking up. She has already endured too much to be silenced by the prospect of offending the wrong person. That reputation made her the perfect vessel for the moment. Had another actor stood and told Meghan to leave, the backlash might have been harsh. They might have been accused of cruelty, jealousy, or attention-seeking. But when Viola said it, the room recognized it as truth. She wasn't seeking the spotlight. She already owned it. Viola's reputation for truth-telling also comes from her refusal to let Hollywood rewrite her story. She has often spoken about the pain of being typecast, of being offered roles limited to stereotypes of maids or downtrodden women, roles that stripped black women of dignity. Instead of conforming, she demanded more. She fought for complex roles, roles that told real stories, roles that broke the mold. She turned down projects that would have paid well but compromised her integrity. She once said that the most revolutionary thing she could do in Hollywood was to demand that her characters be fully human. This insistence on honesty extended beyond her roles into her public persona. She has never hidden her struggles, her insecurities, or her disappointments. That radical transparency made her beloved not only by fans, but by peers who respected her courage. In contrast, Meghan's reputation has often been the opposite. Carefully controlled, heavily curated, tightly scripted. For every speech or interview, there are whispers of media consultants crafting the narrative, of rehearsed lines designed to elicit maximum sympathy or admiration. Her critics say she performs sincerity rather than lives it. This is why Viola's confrontation struck so deeply. It wasn't just one woman humiliating another. It was the embodiment of authenticity confronting performance, of truth confronting spin. Viola's words rang out with such force because they carried the weight of her lifetime of honesty, clashing violently against Meghan's history of perception management. The media coverage that followed reflected this dynamic. Headlines did not frame Viola as cruel or inappropriate. Instead, they called her bold, fearless, and unflinching. Commentators praised her for saying what others were too afraid to say. Social media lit up with clips of her statement, with hashtags that celebrated her courage. People wrote about how refreshing it was to see someone in Hollywood draw a line and defend the sanctity of an event against opportunism. Viola's words went viral not because they were scandalous, but because they were undeniably true in the eyes of those who heard them. Her truth-telling also resonated because it tapped into a broader cultural fatigue with performance. The public has grown weary of figures who seem to live their lives as orchestrated theater, constantly angling for sympathy or attention. In that climate, authenticity becomes a rare and precious commodity. Viola Davis embodied that authenticity, and her confrontation with Meghan was seen as a cultural cleansing moment, a rejection of spin and a reassertion of truth. She was not only defending the Hall of Fame, she was defending the very idea that art and celebrity should mean something real. The beauty of Viola's role in that moment lies in its finality. She did not linger on the subject. She did not launch into a tirade or continue to draw attention to Meghan after delivering her rebuke. She spoke her truth, sat down, and let the weight of her words do the work. That restraint was another reason her actions were celebrated. In a world addicted to drama, she chose clarity over spectacle, precision over indulgence. That choice only elevated her even further. The moment Viola Davis's words struck Meghan Markle, the audience inside the Hall of Fame ceremony became as much a part of the drama as the two women at its center. Every great confrontation needs witnesses, and on that night, the crowd's reaction became a character in itself, one that amplified the sting of humiliation and transformed a private call-out into a public spectacle. Chapter 8 is about those reactions, the gasps, the applause, the nervous silence, and the ripple effect that revealed exactly where Hollywood's loyalties lay. Without the audience, the incident would have been a brief exchange. With them, it became a cultural moment that echoed far beyond the walls of the auditorium. At first, the room seemed stunned into silence. Viola's words, sharp, unambiguous, and final, hung in the air like a thunderclap. "This is not your stage. This night is not yours. Leave the show now." The sentence itself was short, but its resonance was enormous. Those in attendance, already buzzing with unease at Meghan's uninvited presence, suddenly found themselves confronted with the very truth they had been whispering about. The gasps that followed were collective, involuntary sounds, the human body's instinctive reaction to witnessing a boundary being crossed and then restored with brutal clarity. From the front row, where Hollywood's elder statesmen sat, there were murmurs of approval. Some shifted in their seats, nodding almost imperceptibly, as if to say, "Finally, someone said it." These were people who had spent their lives building careers without shortcuts, who knew the sting of rejection and the cost of endurance. To them, Viola's words were not an insult, they were justice. They saw in her defense of the evening a defense of their own sacrifices. When scattered applause broke out, it wasn't raucous or disruptive. It was measured, deliberate, like the sound of people affirming a verdict they had long been waiting for. Others sat frozen, eyes wide, mouths slightly open, unsure how to respond. Hollywood has long been trained to value composure, to mask discomfort with smiles. But this moment was too raw for masks. The cameras sweeping the crowd captured faces caught in transition, some stunned, some delighted, some calculating the optics of their reaction. In an industry where alliances matter, many chose silence, unwilling to appear as though they were taking sides. Yet silence itself spoke volumes. It revealed not disapproval of Viola's words, but the shock of hearing the unspoken rules voiced out loud. For Meghan, the audience's reaction was the cruelest blow of all. If the crowd had rallied to her defense, even hesitantly, she might have salvaged her composure. If there had been boos directed at Viola, or a rush of support urging Meghan to stay, the humiliation would have been softened. But there was none of that. The room did not come to her aid. There was no outcry against Viola. Instead, Meghan was left to face the isolation of being unsupported in a space where she had tried to force belonging. Every clap, every approving nod, every murmured word of agreement was another reminder that she stood alone, unwanted, and unprotected. The tension in the air was almost cinematic. It wasn't simply about what Viola had said, but about the collective recognition that they had witnessed something unscripted, something true. In an age when most public moments are carefully orchestrated, the audience knew instinctively that this was real. That authenticity electrified the room. The whispers grew louder as people leaned toward their neighbors, repeating Viola's words, dissecting them, savoring the blunt honesty of the confrontation. Some smiled into their hands. Others shook their heads in disbelief, but all were captivated. The ceremony, which had been about legacy, was now overshadowed by this clash. The applause, though scattered, grew stronger as seconds passed. It wasn't the standing ovation given to an honoree, but it was applause nonetheless, the kind reserved for a truth that strikes home. The sound ricocheted through the hall, amplifying the humiliation Meghan felt. In that applause, the audience had chosen sides, and the side was not hers. Viola Davis had spoken for them, and in clapping, they made it clear they agreed. There were also those who chose silence not out of neutrality, but out of awe. For them, the moment was too heavy to respond to immediately. They sat, eyes fixed on the stage, absorbing the fact that they had just witnessed something historic. These were the people who would later tell reporters that they couldn't believe it happened, that they felt the air change. Their silence was not disapproval, it was reverence. Reverence for the kind of truth-telling that rarely happens in public, reverence for Viola's courage, and reverence for the power of authenticity to slice through spectacle. The dynamic between the gasps, applause, and silence created a layered atmosphere. It wasn't unanimous, but it was overwhelmingly tilted in Viola's favor. For Meghan, it created a sense of being surrounded on all sides by judgment. No matter where she looked, she saw either eyes filled with shock at her presence or expressions that confirmed she was unwelcome. The audience had transformed into a mirror, reflecting back at her the perception she had long tried to outrun. That she was more performance than substance, more opportunism than authenticity. The power of audience reactions lies in their ability to validate or invalidate what has been said. Viola's words, already sharp, became sharper because they were received with recognition. The gasps validated the audacity of her honesty. The applause validated the truth of her statement. The silence validated the weight of the moment. Together, they turned a personal rebuke into a communal judgment. Meghan was not only being told to leave by one woman. She was being told she didn't belong by the collective energy of the room. Later, when clips of the moment circulated online, the audience's reaction became as important as Viola's words. People replayed the footage not just to hear what Viola said, but to watch the crowd's response. Viewers noted the gasps, the approving nods, the claps. They analyzed the celebrities caught on camera, interpreting their expressions as endorsements or condemnations. Social media users froze frames to point out who was smiling, who was whispering, who avoided eye contact. The audience had become evidence, their reactions proof that Viola's truth was shared, not isolated. This is what humiliation looks like at its peak. Not just being called out, but being called out in front of an audience that agrees with your accuser. For Meghan, The weight of that reaction must have been crushing. For Viola, it was confirmation that she had spoken the truth not just for herself, but for everyone in that hall. The audience's role in the moment elevated it from confrontation to cultural turning point.